it just takes a lot of time. I think you need to really fall in love with the process. Like if you don't really love to do this, like on the level of just doing it, like without looking at the outcomes or how much attention you're going to get from this or who's going to think this is cool. If you don't really just love doing it, it's not going to sustain, you know, because it's constantly changing. It's constantly evolving from as a producer, as a mix engineer, as whatever you're doing in this industry, like it's going to evolve, you know? So I think it's just understanding takes a tremendous amount of time. You need to be adaptable. You're not going to just stick to the script and it's going to play out for 30 years. You know what I mean?
I guess we can go ahead and get started. I feel like we've already talked about quite a bit, but we'll kind of start fresh. And first of all, thank you for doing this, man. I'm stoked to chat with you for a little bit here.
100%, man.
So yeah, I guess we'll start off just kind of. I know it's a broad question, but what is your background in music, and kind of how did you get to be where you are today?
It's for me, it's really broad.
Yeah.
But yeah, I started off as a drummer a long time ago, and just really was infatuated with music from an early age, you know, like just hearing records and being like, how does it sound like that? You know what I mean? And I remember hearing Dave Grohl as a drummer, and you know, my older brother. Yeah. This was like Nirvana.
Yeah.
You know, 90s. But my brother was big into music, and so just hearing him, I was like, man, I want to play drums immediately. You know, I was like, wow.
Yeah,
that'd be awesome. So I just beat on my mom's pots and pans for years, and you know, eventually got like a little makeshift kit and did that for a while. Played in some bands in high school, you know, nothing serious. I mean, we just had a great time. We played around town, and you know, eventually like heard hip hop music, and I was like, man, how are they doing these sounds? Number one, like there were sounds in hip hop and R&B music at that time that we weren't hearing. You know, I listened to a lot of rock. And so I played basketball, and we would travel, and me and my teammates would trade CDs. You know, I had a lot of the rock stuff. They had a lot of the hip hop stuff. And so that was kind of my like education on like early hip hop, and just hearing the producers, it was like mind blowing to me.
Yeah.
You know, to hear the synths and just these sounds I had never heard in my life. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that just kind of got my mind going of like, I got to figure out how they're doing this.
Yeah.
And I had no idea, you know, and it's like, I'm from a small town in North Carolina. And so like nobody knew about this stuff or was really interested necessarily beyond listening. But I was like reading liner notes and trying to figure out what was going on.
What albums
reading magazines.
Were you like, what were the albums that you were obsessed with?
I mean, a lot of early, like Timbaland was a big influence for sure. I mean, as he is for a lot of producers, but like that early Missy Elliott album, I was like, what in the world? Like, you know, just mind blowing. DMX, you know, early DMX, like Dame Grease records. Jay-Z, Hard Knock Life, Volume 2.
Great one.
I mean, those were like the first rap albums that I heard, you know, 3 6 Mafia, No Limit, like the producers for No Limit were way ahead of their time. Like Beats by the Pound, I think is what it was.
Yeah.
I was just blown away.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that got me going, and I really was just trying to figure out how to do it. And, you know, slow process, reading magazines, going to like Barnes and Noble, trying to read computer music or whatever, you know, and just trying to figure out how they were doing it. And eventually got Reason 1.0, the OG.
Yeah. Wow. And 1.0.
1.0. Yeah. Showing my age now.
Yeah.
But no, I got started pretty early. But also, yeah, that was the very beginning. And just started making beats, passing CDs around in high school, like beat CDs, you know, trying to get anybody who could rap
Mm-hmm.
to work with me and try to put something together.
How
Nothing really happened too much with it at that point. You know, it's like we just rap it in the lunch line or something like that, you know, but it wasn't anything serious.
mhm. Did you have a lot
Um,
of kids at your school that were into rap, being from a small town in North Carolina, or was it kind of hard to find people in the, similar I don't know, enjoyment of
yeah,
it that you were?
honestly, it was kind of interesting because I mean, again, like all the kids on my basketball team, like they were all into it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my first introduction to it. But then, like, once I got into high school, it was starting to get more popular, you know, and it was like, I think people were just more aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
But the people who like actually wanted to do it and actually wanted to like produce or make beats or whatever, no, not really.
Yeah,
You
few and
know,
far between.
I remember there was like, you know, a couple of different instances where I would just go to the music store. Like my dad would just drive me to the little mom and pop music shop, and I would just like play on the Triton, you know, get the drum kit out, and um, I would meet people there, you know, who were just doing the same thing. I was like, oh, I just want to be able to like try to get exposed to these tools that are being used to make these records, you know, not knowing what they really were at that point, but
Yeah,
it was super cool.
that's awesome, man.
So I don't know where we're going here, but
After high school, where did you go?
I ended up going to a traditional university, and my parents were like, number one, I mean, what are you going to do in music, like with a career, right? So I had looked into going to some schools that were dedicated to music. Like there was like Full Sail. I think there was like Berkeley at the time. And that's what I wanted to do because I just wasn't interested in anything except music, you know, at that point.
Yeah.
But it just wasn't something that, again, it's like, it wasn't feasible to have have any kind of future with that.
Yeah.
To my parents and to most people at that time. So I went to a traditional university, ended up studying IT, which is totally unrelated to music, but continued to make a lot of music out of my dorm room. And I found this website called soundclick.com. I don't know if you're familiar.
I'm not. No, I've never heard of that one.
Okay. Well, it was like, it was the first. I'm gonna say this. Somebody else could be like, maybe mp3.com was a little earlier, but soundclick.com was like the first platform for artists to go find like production and beats. And there were a lot of producers who are doing, you know, the records now, like they were on SoundClick. It was pretty cool to kind of come up. But anyway, I started a page on there and just put like 20 beats or something in college.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, probably after like 6 months of just posting beats, I started getting hit up by A&Rs and like publishers.
Wow.
And they're, you know, wanting to say, you know, come fly out here and work with this artist or whatever. And so I was like, oh, well, you know, maybe this is something that you could do.
Yeah.
And it was just fun for me at that point. But anyway, that kind of got things rolling. And by the time I graduated, I ended up signing a publishing deal. And yeah, packed my bags. I was in LA within, you know, at least probably about a year after I graduated. I was out in LA and kind of doing that whole thing, working in songwriting camps and traveling and working in different studios. So
nice.
And that was the start.
Yeah. And how long were you
Long
out in LA
story,
then?
right? Well, living out there, I was probably out there off and on for like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So not terribly long.
Yeah.
But
you built a lot of relationships out there that you've kind of maintained and kept up moving back to North Carolina.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, I met some of like some of the best people that I've met in the industry. Like it was a blessing, you know, just to like run into certain people at the right time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I can't stress that enough. People who are coming up, it's like, I know we're in the age of social media and all that, but building these relationships, it's like, it's huge, you know, and like you meet the right people who introduce you to that person. And like, these are people that I still talk to this day. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. And what kind of twofold question here. What have you seen as the biggest challenges so far in building a career in music? And, what have you seen some of your colleagues and peers kind of run into as well that I don't know, people could be looking out for if they want to go into this?
Biggest challenges. Man, honestly, like I think just these days, people just want it immediately,
Yeah.
and they want all this stuff to come together in a way that like you're making money, or any kind of revenue very quickly,
Mhm.
or you're just seeing a lot of attention and getting a lot of respect for your work. And I think for me coming up, it was such a long grind. Like, I mean, I just sat here and told you this like story of me coming up, and there was tons and tons and tons of hours. I mean, crazy hours of me like working that, I can't show you.
Yeah.
I can't tell you about that, but it didn't happen quickly. Like none of this happened. And we can talk more a little of the storyline. Like once I hit like, okay, this is professional now,
Mhm.
which is different, but it just takes a lot of time, and I think you need to really fall in love with the process of the stuff. Like if you don't really love to do this, like on the level of just doing it, like without looking at the outcomes or how much attention you're going to get from this or who's going to think this is cool, like if you don't really just love doing it, it's not going to sustain,
Yeah.
because it's constantly changing. It's constantly evolving. What worked for you maybe for a little while it's going to change next year.
Yeah.
It's going to be different from as a producer, as a mix engineer, as whatever you're doing in this industry, like it's going to evolve,
Yeah.
so I think it's just understanding takes a tremendous amount of time. You need to be adaptable. That's probably one of the biggest things is understanding like you're not going to just stick to the script and it's going to play out for 30 years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It changes fast for sure.
Super fast. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, going back a little bit, you went out to LA and now you're kind of building this. I mean, you have built this into your full-time job. Um, can you kind of outline exactly what you do? You're a producer, you're an engineer. Is there anything else that you do? And how has that been, like you kind of mentioned earlier, kind of maybe some of the challenges of building it into not just a passion project, but a full-time, this is my career, this is what I'm doing, and here we are.
Yeah. Well, I think, that's a good example of how you have to be adaptable. Because when I came into this, I wanted to be a producer. And I think as a lot of young musicians and people coming up, it's like you kind of have this idea in your head of success or like what you're going to do this full time and have it be a career, which for me was I need to be, making Billboard hits or, like a Grammy nominated producer or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was the goal. And not to say there's anything wrong with that at all. But, I think I started to realize that that's not the only, route to being, somewhat successful or, just being able to have a career in it.
Yeah.
So I started as a producer. And while I was doing that, the artists I was working with, I mean, a lot of them were like, man, I mean, your mixes, like that's kind of what we're really drawn to right now, just as much as the beats is, the way you're mixing the stuff, the way you're getting our vocals to sound. And then other producers heard that and were hiring me just to mix their beats. And I got a lot of mixing work through my production work. So that wasn't something that was intentional as far as like, I want to really be a mixing engineer. I always respected it. I just didn't necessarily know that that's, what I wanted to do or that's something that I could do. But, just by virtue of people saying this is a valuable service, it's like, oh, cool. Well, maybe I could try to like really focus on that.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of how that all came to play. And then that's ultimately how YouTube, that stuff came about. It was like I was working with the artist at the time who, and we were working extensively, but I was more producing. But I had mixed a lot of his stuff, and so I ended up like getting some of that stuff out there, and people were curious about like how I mixed his vocals. And so I just said, well, what if I made a tutorial like for YouTube? Because there wasn't anything out there like in this particular style,
Yeah.
per se. There was very little. I'm sure there was some, but it was there was not the amount of content there is now on YouTube.
Yeah.
And so I just said, well, I'll just put something up for fun, and it was just me like mixing this vocal and Pro Tools, and eventually the artist actually, he was like, I don't want my raw vocals like out there like that. So I took it down.
Mm-hmm.
And this was kind of the eye opener for me, or the ear opener for me, was I started getting emails as like that, I go back to that video. People were saying I go back to that video as a reference. Why did you take that video down? And it kept happening, over the course of a few months.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, well, maybe there's something, maybe that's really helpful for people. Maybe there's something there. So that was what kind of got my wheels turning with doing more mixing content at that point. And I was doing more mixing professionally at that stage. But my YouTube channel, I know this is kind of disjointed because this has been my career.
Yeah, dude.
It's just like,
yeah.
It's been
Let
like
it fly.
just a lot of different stuff.
Yeah.
But my YouTube channel, like if you go back to my first videos, it's like beat making videos. It's like when I was in my production, sort of focus.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was like a lull of no content, and then it was into mixing, and that's what it was.
Yep.
It was like that was the start of that. And yeah, here we are.
Yeah.
So,
and did you fall in love with mixing just as you did with producing? Or was that kind of
way more?
Way more. Interesting.
Way more.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why I'm doing it now, is because it like the more people were telling me that they felt like what I was doing was like, I don't know, it was like something on its own, separate than me producing for them. And then when I started like actually focusing on it the way that I had been focusing on producing, I started having a lot of fun with it. And it was like, I actually think that I like this more than producing.
Yeah.
So I had like a publishing deal and all that at that time. And actually at the end of that, like I had about a year on my publishing deal, and I was like, I traveled around, did that. I was like, man, I really just want to be an engineer. Like I really like this, love this. So yeah, it was definitely like a moment of maybe this is my niche, so to speak. Not that I can't still produce, or I still love to produce.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love it, man.
Yeah, man. And you've gotten into mastering as well, right? Sort of
Absolutely.
delving into that.
It's the same story. It's like I was doing mixing, and then I would just do the masters a lot of times just to get it out to labels or whoever, just to hear it competitively,
Yeah.
And then they were like, well, can we just use that? I'm like, of course you can.
Yeah.
We'll talk after, but yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
And it's so cool that we're in an age now where you can do this work from anywhere.
100%.
How has it been kind of bringing this all back to North Carolina where you grew up, and now you're doing music full time and you can work with clients around the globe and everything? How has that been?
It's amazing, man. It's amazing. I think there's something to be said about, traveling and going to different places and being where the industry is, I like we said, there was a lot of valuable things that I learned, and a lot of people that I met, a lot of interactions that happened during that time. Not just in LA, but like I've been in a lot of different studios all over the country, all over the world, and have learned a lot, so there's no substitute for that. But now at this point, like when I'm doing what I want to do, I want to be with my family. I want to be closer to my friends wherever they are, and like just having a place that you can kind of, reset, relax a little bit. It's great. I mean, again, this is where I grew up, man, North
Yeah.
Carolina. So
Yeah, man.
it's been awesome.
Back to your roots. So yeah, you kind of just, it seems like a common thread through all this is you just kind of stuck your foot out there, like with the uploading your beats online, uploading a video on YouTube. But now
Hmm.
you've kind of grown a presence online. How has that kind of helped build your online business? And, how has that helped you, grow in your client base and all that stuff? Would you call
What?
that, sorry, let me back that up. Would you
Yeah,
think that
sure.
is important in this day and age for people that want to get into this business to have an online presence and to make content like you have? Or is there, anything you'd suggest?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think obviously there's different paths. So if you want to go work in a traditional studio, a Blackbird, some of these some of these older studios, if you want to go do that and be an engineer or a producer at that level, that's a whole different grind, So you need to figure out how to get into those spaces, and then you need to know a whole different skill set. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So there are people out there who still want to do that, and I think that that's admirable because it's pretty cool as well. But if you're someone who's just like, hey, I want to kind of be in my element, I got a home studio, I want to be able to have a little bit more flexibility in my schedule. Yeah, you got to be able to create content. You've got to dive into these new avenues of getting some exposure. I think we could talk about, the ways to do that in this day and age that I think will resonate with not just people in general, but with, people who are potential clients who are going to trust you
Yeah.
with their music, which is something that I don't take for granted and I don't think anybody should. I think there's a respectful way to do it where it's not just about getting attention, but you definitely need to just sort of grab all these different resources in terms of social media, creating content, and find your niche like we're talking about. That mixing and eventually mastering stuff became something that I was serving an audience that wasn't getting what they needed. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? It wasn't really out there in that way. So I think finding your niche in that regard and then creating content, yeah, it can definitely be incredibly helpful and bring you a lot of different people who are excited about your work and want you to do the same thing for them.
Yeah. I feel like as a creative, you always have to be learning and, yeah, just doing something different all the time to keep, to keep excited about
Absolutely.
it and to keep interested and, yeah, focused and, yeah. Um,
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm still learning so much. And I think that it should be pretty obvious to people out there who are coming up, but like once you get to a point where you know everything, or like you have hit a ceiling or something, it's like you should probably be worried.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because there's there's just so much to learn. There will always be more to learn. Like there's always mistakes that you can learn from. But that's another thing too that I think is important for us to talk about. That's been important for me is, sometimes we can just get kind of paralyzed, um, in fear of like just doing anything because of how it's going to be perceived, or like, if this is your best work or whatever. But sometimes like just doing it and like finding a completion and doing the best job you can
Yeah.
and then just putting it out there, it's that's a good thing, and that's part of the process as well, is like just finish, move on. If you make a mistake, learn from it, get through it.
Yeah.
It seems simple, but I think it's harder, especially nowadays where like everybody's watching, different things. And like you
Yeah.
put out a piece of content, like once you build an audience, it's like people are following it really closely, but
Yeah.
you learn from it.
And you can
So
have 100 people give you great feedback and then one person gives you negative feedback and it just ruins your day.
Well,
It can.
hopefully not.
Yeah.
Hopefully not.
Um,
Yeah. Well, like that's another thing too, is like, I, if you're doing anything and you're putting it out there and you're putting your energy into it, like
yeah.
not everybody's gonna like it, you know,
Yeah.
and not everybody's gonna like you, you know, to
Hmm.
be real. But I think you just have to be honest with yourself and be like, what are your intentions in this? And
Hmm.
that's, you know, a lot of the content that I've created. I'm always trying to ask myself, like, the question is always, if I'm creating any kind of content, it's like, how did this help me? You know,
Yeah.
did it genuinely help me? Is this something I'm using? You know, is this
Yeah.
something that like has empowered my process, has, you know, helped me? Then it's like, it's easy. Of course I can create content about this. You know, it's like, I'm confident this is going to help somebody. So if you
Yeah.
don't like it, like, you know, skip the video, don't use it.
Yeah.
But I think it's great.
People are so inundated with different products that they feel like they need everything. Like they feel like they need outboard
Everything.
gear. They feel like they need a certain desk. They need, you know, X, Y, or Z like versions of plugins. Um, I guess what would you say is like absolutely necessary? And do you have any tips on not getting bogged down and what to buy and what to get? You know, if you're an up and coming producer.
This is a great question because there are way, way too many options. And I mean that, you know, it's like some people would say, oh, we have the best tools available, you know, and we can just go buy all these different plugins, these emulations and things that do all of this stuff. But it's a little bit of option overload. And I think it can be more harmful than helpful.
Yeah.
So my advice, a lot of people when they first start is like, you know, I need, like you said, I need all these different plugins, the best plugins, you know, give me the greatest channel strip and, you know, the pre's and the mic and all that. And they set it all up and it sounds terrible. And they're like, well, I just spent, you know, all this money and like, why doesn't it sound good?
Hmm.
Like, you need to start very simply and you need to learn how to maximize what you have at that level. And as you kind of hit the ceiling of whatever it is you have. So if, in my opinion, you know, get a pretty solid interface with an onboard pre, you know, just get something simple. If you got a laptop, you got all you need.
Yeah.
Use stock plugins when you first start. Like,
Yeah.
just learn how a compressor works. Like, what does a compressor do?
Hmm.
Learn what a compressor does. Like, how do you EQ a vocal properly? Just use your stock plugins. And then, you know, as you progress and you're like, okay, I just don't think I'm getting the sound that I want, but I've been using this for a long time. I know how it works. Fundamentally, I know how compression works, but I want to venture into something else. Go buy another compressor. Don't go buy Mercury bundle from
Hmm.
Waves, like your next purchase, but like, you know, buy another compressor,
Hmm.
a better third party compressor. And then once you figure that one out, if you want to maybe dive into having an optical compressor versus a FET style plug-in compressor, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think there's something to be said about adding things slowly versus just buying a bunch of stuff and not knowing how to use it.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be helpful
Yeah.
for a lot of people. It was for me too. I mean, you just can't expect to just dive in and,
Yeah.
you know, have too many options.
Yeah. It makes it almost seem like there's a barrier to entry when you like, I don't know, when all these, you see all these videos and people have, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of plugins. I can't imagine. I mean, you know, I feel like we both got into this pretty early and it's like, yeah, using stock FL plugins was my go-to for years. And I just had these little crappy Bose like computer speakers, and that's what I used. And I'm like, man, like now I'd be so overwhelmed by all the things that I would feel like I need to get, but it's not necessary.
No,
No.
no. And it's not going to help you in the
Yeah.
end to like have them immediately. Like you said, I mean, most of us when we were coming up, we just didn't have those options.
Yeah.
You know, it was like, use what you have, use whatever stock plugins it came with. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I have a ton of plugins. Like people like see my when I open up, I'll open up my window in Logic and like they'll see the plugins and they're like, how did you like get all these plugins and buy all these plugins? It's happened over the course of 20 years or something like that. So, but also this is another little tip is I use the plugin manager, and there's plugin managers in a lot of different DAWs, so you can categorize plugins. So I do have a ton of different plugins, and I'll reach for some of them. If I'm in my head, I'm like, oh yeah, the SIEQ from Sound Toys, that's what I want right now. Can do that, but I have these categories where in my compression, I literally have, I've probably got 10 compressors right now. I probably own 20 to 30, but like these are the 10 that like I'm going to use these pretty much weekly. You know what I mean? And just limiting them. And you don't need 10 compressors right now, most people. But what I'm saying is just put categories and just have the stuff that you just actually are focused on using at that point. And then you can add more, just so you're not getting like super bogged down.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I was going to ask kind of the importance of a good vibe in the studio. And it totally goes for mixing and mastering too. I mean, your studio looks immaculate, dude. It looks much cleaner than mine on a regular basis. And I don't know, what's your thoughts on keeping a nice, clean workspace, and how does that impact your day-to-day, workflow and focus?
Well, I am OCD like to the next level.
I wish I was.
Well, I don't think you do actually, but it comes with its own set of challenges. But for this stuff, it actually does help because I mean, when you're just coming down to work, I know where everything's set. Like when I finish up for the day, I make sure I might take a picture of the channel strips. I get everything in place, and I think that's just crucial for me. Like if I come down here and everything is just super crazy. Like right now, I'll be honest with you. The other side of the room, I might have to move the camera just to show you, but I have a kit over there, a drum kit, and I've been tuning it. And so I've been pulling off all the old heads, and it's just like, it's kind of a mess. And so it's kind of bothering me right now.
Yeah.
But we'll have to work on that. But yeah, man, it's really, really important to me to be organized. And also, I mean, when you have other people that you're working with, your clients expect you to be efficient. They expect you to, be approaching this in a professional way, So when I'm coming down at any given moment or whatever's going on here, like this is the workspace. So we're here to get it done. And, I don't want a bunch of cables, all mismatched and not knowing what's going on. Like I'm not going to be able to do my best work on a number of levels.
Yeah, man. So. What are some tips that you would give to somebody that wants to build this into a business to make it extremely professional? And, like, do you have, a certain way that you send files? Is there, how timely are your emails? Kind of, what are some basics that somebody can kind of implement to build this into a really professional and successful business?
Well, I think you hit on at least the most important part, which is this is a service-based business and industry. If you want to do it on a very high level and you want to do it consistently, the only reason people are going to come back to you is because you're providing them a valuable service. Like there's so many people out here who are way more creatively talented than I am. Like I'll be the first one to tell you that, but being timely, like being professional, being like compassionate, being patient with people, like understanding the people you're working with, and listening, trying to understand what they're really wanting. That's a different kind of thing than, I'm the best producer, mix engineer ever. And I'm just, okay, yeah, you pay me, here it is. This is awesome. Yeah. You better love it. Like that's not the business we're in. And I think you have to check your ego every day. And sometimes I feel like, I'm like, man, this is an awesome mix, but this isn't my song. Yep. It's like, this is somebody else's baby and they're trusting me with it. And I'm going to do the best I can to make sure they're comfortable with it. Cause I want to, if I was in their position, I would want the same.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just common courtesy.
Yeah. I know you had the events for quite a while.
Quite a while.
Yeah. How many years did you have those before switching to the Atom Audios?
Well, the first set of monitors I ever had were these old event, like TR8s. And I set them up in my dorm room. That was the monitors I had in my dorm.
Mm-hmm.
And
the ones you had here were the ones in your dorm? The ones that you had before these are the ones that were in your dorm?
No. I had I eventually upgraded to the 2030, which is a three-way.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
And I used those and loved them.
Mm-hmm.
And like people who've watched my YouTube channel and all that, they saw them and they stopped making them, and people were just asking tons of questions about them. And I was like totally sticking, like I did not want to switch. I mean, I think any mix engineer, mastering guy especially, knows like once you kind of learn a set of speakers, you do not want to switch.
Yeah.
At least unless you have to.
Yeah.
So I was very hesitant, but at the same time, I started feeling like I was missing something, especially in the mids, and like kind of more perceiving compression, and then also translation. Like there were a lot of car checks that were happening where I was coming back and making changes, and you kind of learn how to sort of finesse that at a certain point. You kind of figure out what the shortcomings are. But I was just kind of like, well, what if I could just get it right if I have a tuned room? And then I set up the A8Vs, and it's like, I mean, I have come back and made very minor changes, just level stuff that was my ears, but not like take your mix out to the car and just be like, this sounds like a whole different mix.
Yeah.
Like it just hasn't been like that. And that's probably the first time that's ever happened for me. And it's been a tremendous time saver. And
great,
I was concerned about it. I was a little nervous about it because, it's like you send them off to your clients for the first time and you're like,
yeah,
I've got new monitors.
Yeah. Disclaimer at the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was like kind of nervous about it, but all the notes were like, yeah, this is awesome. Little changes or whatever, but not based on anything that were because of the monitors. It was just like, yeah, they were pretty much there. So that's been the first time it's ever happened in my career. So I'm psyched about them for sure.
What was the process of going from a dome tweeter like the old event speakers that you had to changing to something completely different with the ribbon tweeter that we have? How was that for you?
I mean, there wasn't really a transition. It was pretty smooth, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. Pun intended.
Pun maybe intended a little bit. Yeah, it really was. I mean, and you can crank these things up. That's the other thing with my old speakers. Once you turn them up to a certain point, I like to get the reflection in the room, when they're kind of turned up, like you're talking about, having some big towers and just letting them rock.
Yeah.
But when you do that, a lot of times, especially with near fields, that high end starts to get very fatiguing, and it can get a little rough. Not that I would sit in front of these for a long period of time with them loud, but they're very smooth. Like it's not like a harsh, they open up in a way that's very smooth.
Yeah. I think we've covered a lot of ground. So where can people find out more about what you do and what you're up to?
Most of it's on the website, SeanDevine.com. I have a YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/SeanDevine. Instagram @SeanDevine. Those are pretty much all. I know there's a lot of different platforms out here. I do have a Twitter. I haven't been using that as much, but occasionally I'll jump on there. But yeah, those are kind of the main ones. But yeah, shoot me a comment, message. I'd love to hear from you. And yeah, I hope there was something in here that was helpful. But shout out to Atom Audio for sure. Thanks for having me on.
There's a lot of really great stuff, man. So really appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk with us.
Absolutely. Appreciate y'all having me.